So good evening, everybody. I'm Paula DeChico. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I've been in practice since 2004. So we are wrapping up our 20th year now. And I've been in this exact same office at this exact same desk since 2005. I'm in the west side, on the west side of the island of Montreal, where I have had the absolute honor of working with over 5,000 patients in my focus is really on environmental medicine in terms of working with individuals with mold toxicity, Lyme disease and chronic infections, heavy metal toxicity, etc. Obviously, I work with mental health, IBS, hormonal challenges, autoimmune challenges, cancer day in and day out. And probiotics are an integral part of a consideration for all of those different health challenges. So regardless of the health challenge, looking at the gut microbiome, seeing what's going on in there, considering probiotics is an important step for pretty much any and all patients that I've seen in these 20 years. And we're just going to dip our toes into why is this so important and how can the bugs in the gut and probiotics have such widespread impacts on all of our other organ systems. So that's the part that I'm really excited to share with you, because as a naturopathic doctor, for those of you who are familiar with naturopathy, our whole big kick is holistic medicine. And basically what that means is that our lenses, our glasses that we put on when we're looking at a patient is to try to understand how their different symptoms in different body parts are actually interrelated and how they actually share many of the times a common root system. So what are the imbalances in the human body that are creating a lot of their different symptoms and their different ailments? Conventional medicine is absolutely fantastic for what it is, which is primarily symptom management. You've blown out your shoulder, you have uncontrolled inflammation, you may need 2 weeks of an anti-inflammatory. You've got a lot of heartburn, that's damaging to the cells. We may need to use an antacid for a short period of time. These are examples, right? Antibiotics are fantastic in terms of life-saving, but all of these different interventions have a lifespan and they have consequences to it. So all those symptom management can be really necessary and wonderful that we have that. Naturopathy appreciates all of that, but also takes a step back with the idea that we'll be able to see the forest through the trees. You're not just anxiety, you're not just IBS, you're not just joint pain, you're not just insomnia, you're not just perimenopause. You're actually the totality of all of those things together and how many imbalances are actually connected. So what we see, despite the incredible advancements in science and modern medicine, we see an ongoing increase in chronic diseases, including autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc., even affecting us younger and younger in our age. How could that be if we understand so much? On a conventional medical level, we have all these great interventions. Well, my perspective is that one of the main drivers of these chronic diseases are imbalances in the gut microbiome and environmental toxins. And these are two things that often go together. So despite all of our medical and scientific advancements, we're not doing the right things for our gut microbiome, and we're just increasing our exposure to environmental toxins. So those two are really going to drive our chronic disease epidemic. So looking at the gut microbiome and just that little drop in the bucket of probiotics can actually do a world of good. So let's have a look and see how probiotics impact whole body health. Before we start on that front, we do have to do our administrative housekeeping. Advisor to Atrium Innovations, who is the presenter of this talk. Otherwise, I have no other conflicts of interest. I don't work for anyone aside from myself. What are we going to look at today? We've got 4 main chapters to talk about tonight. One of them is understanding the gut microbiome. What is this thing that is everywhere in the press that everyone is talking about? Let's dig into it and really get a good understanding of what that means. Second, we want to talk about the importance of research. This is so important because 2 probiotics are not necessarily interchangeable. You may be comparing an apple with an orange and not realizing it. So we're going to talk about that. The third chapter is going to be 3 mistakes that are commonly made by individuals like yourselves when you're going to the health food store to choose a probiotic. So we're going to name what those 3 issues can be and show you how you can really navigate that to not fall in those traps. And then the fourth one is real life uses, where we're actually going to look at 3 women and different health conditions that they have and which probiotic may be applicable for themselves, for them. I'm just going to open the chat and just see if there's anything really important or pertinent here. I appreciate all the thank yous. My voice, I've got Jane saying that my voice is fading and gets garbled from time to time. And I've got Lydia who's agreeing with that scrambling now and then. So if anybody else is noticing that, I'm going to try and speak more clearly. If that's ongoing, then please let me know. We will keep a question answer period at the end. So please jot down your questions, or you can put them in the chat or the Q&A section, but I will only look at those towards the end. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 45, 50 minutes chatting where, well, not chatting, where I am giving, and then we'll keep a 10 to 15 minutes to try to navigate question answer period. Sounds good? All right, well, you don't really have a choice there. That's the way it's going to go. So let's get started. In that chapter 1 about the gut microbiome. Okay. All right, so I've got Lydia. So let's take a moment because I've got a couple of people saying that there's an issue with my voice. When we did do our IT check before getting on, it was okay. So let's just take a moment. Jacqueline, can you hear me? Jacqueline is our support on the atrium front. So this shouldn't take more than a few minutes, or maybe even less than that. So I've got Lori saying the sound is fine. Okay, so on your end, you think that the sound is fine? Okay, great. And then one last question, will the attendees receive the recording? Okay. Okay, I'll address that. Thank you. All right, so for the person who asked if you will receive a copy of the recording, this is through Healthy Planet, so we will have to get back to you. I am not sure. All right, so in terms of the sound, I've got the sound check on the other end that we're good to go. So I will try to speak as clearly as possible. Let's look at the gut microbiome and how it impacts other systems. So with regards to the gut, we can use the analogy of seeing the gut as a garden. So we can see that the flowers are our probiotics, our good bacteria, and that our prebiotics, which is food for the flowers, is like our fertilizer. And what happens is that when we don't have enough fertilizer and flowers, then we've got enough space for the weeds to grow. And the weeds are the bad bugs. So this is where I'd like to take a moment just to do some basic 101 about the gut microbiome. We are 10 times more bug than we are human. So what that means is that you have 10 times more bugs than you have with the actual cells of your human self. But the bugs are so much smaller that we actually don't see all of these bazillion creepy crawly things, but we see you. The majority of those trillions of bugs live in the digestive tube, which is actually a really smart adaptation and protective response. Because if you think of it logically, your digestive tube, yes, it's inside your body, but it's exposed and interacts with the outside world because it has 2 holes at the 2 openings, at the top and at the bottom. So it's like the digestive tube acts as this interface between the outside world with our holes in the tubes and the inside world, because the tube is actually in the gut. And so the body needs to have a number of checkpoints and protectors within that tube to make sure that not just anything from the outside world gets to traverse onto the inside. And one of those protective mechanisms is probiotics. So that's one of the reasons why we have these gazillion probiotics and bacteria and different types of bugs like healthy yeast, healthy parasites that live in the gut. And so when we look at that quantity of bugs in the gut, we say, wow, are they just influencing our digestive tract? And the answer is no. The bugs in the gut have a significant impact on three body systems that are intimately interrelated. Any guesses as to what three body systems we're talking about? You can quickly throw that into the Q&A or into the chat if you have any guesses. Okay, so I've got no takers, so I'm going to move on. The three body systems that are intimately related are the digestive system. Oh, we've got some takers. Yes, exactly. We've got Susan, who said immune system. We've got Wanda and Shelley, who said the brain. Wonderful. So the digestive system, the immune system, and the nervous system are three body systems that are intimately related. When we go back to actually embryo stage, so when egg meets sperm and that one cell gets created and then it goes through bazillions of divisions, one of the early developments is that we become three different layers. And that middle layer is what goes on to becoming your digestive, immune, and nervous systems. So those three body systems all come from a same origin. With that comes a circuitry that intimately connects those three body systems together. So how they communicate is largely through the bugs in the gut. So the way I explain it to patients is, it's like those bugs in the gut are sitting in your digestive tract, and to communicate to your digestive system, your immune system, and your nervous system, those bugs are sending those body systems text messages. If the bugs in your gut are happy, they're going to send happy smiley face emojis to those three body systems. If the bugs in your gut, on the other hand, are not happy, then they are sending poop emojis to those three body systems. And those three body systems are going to be impacted by the health of those probiotics and of the gut microbiome. So there are a number of individuals whose gut microbiomes are not doing well, but they have no digestive symptoms. But they do have symptoms with regards to their immune system. Maybe it's eczema, maybe it's frequent colds and flus. In terms of their nervous system, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's brain fog, difficulty concentrating, difficulty with mood changes. So just because you don't have digestive symptoms, it is possible that the gut microbiome is negatively impacted other body systems and producing symptoms that could be related to that. So when we're looking at the different bugs in the gut, the way I describe it to patients is that it's like we've got three categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. With regards to the good, those are the probiotics, the pro yeast. These are, who we want in there. So it's more of the mentality of the more the merrier. Great. Those are going to be our foot soldiers that are patrolling our digestive system and making sure that only the healthy people, though only the healthy ones are allowed in, whatever it is from our external environment. And if there's something that those probiotics don't like, then they may sound an alarm and influence these other body systems. We're going to jump from the good to just the really bad, right? So those are the things like food poisoning, beaver fever, which we know as Giardia, C. difficile that can happen by a hospital stay when we're taking lots of meds. These are bugs that we really don't want in our digestive tract, and that they could really wreak havoc in those more typical fashions of creating a lot of digestive symptoms like diarrhea, lots of bloating, etc. So we know a lot about that category, and our conventional medical doctors and gastroenterologists are really, really good with that category. However, we've got this middle category, and this middle category are bugs that are normal inhabitants of our microbiome, but it's not a more the merrier. It's you're at a good level when you stay under a certain amount. If you stay under that certain amount, then you're contributing to the benefits of the gut microbiome. If those bugs overgrow, then they're going to contribute to symptoms. And it's that middle category that we call the commensal bugs that can really be tricky, because it's not that they're infectious, but if they're overgrown, they're problematic. And that's where naturopathy shines a lot of the time, is that we look at that middle category. And then when we look at probiotics, they can have a real significant beneficial impact in helping that middle category. So when we look at it's actually extremely complex. And we have a lot of different components that have a different bug population. So what we've got is the food's coming down the pipe. It lands in the yellow bag, which is the stomach. And then it's going to traverse to those squiggly light blue lines. And then it's going to go through the bigger, darker blue tube. So that's the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. And as you see that as we progress down the tube from the stomach to the small to the large intestine, we get two things. One is a greater variety of the different bugs that are supposed to be in there and a greater quantity. So this becomes really important when we need to differentiate between, well, where do we want to affect our action? Do we want to action the small intestine or do we want to action the large intestine? And what we're going to see is that we want to action a lot of the small intestine, and we're going to see why. Okay. So here's a great slide that talks about that gut-brain axis that we talked about. Who was that? That was Susan and Shelley, who talked about the connection between the gut and the brain. Okay. So what we've got here is a bidirectional highway. So there's a highway that connects the gut and the brain where the communication between the two moves in both directions. So as we see here on the slide, what is being communicated from the brain to the gut is about movement of the intestines, the secretion and production of our enzymes, how we're going to deliver our nutrients, and how the microbiome is affected. So with regards to our brain chemistry, our stress responses, we see right away that that's going to impact how the gut functions. And in the other direction, we've got the gut in terms of the bugs in the gut that are going to largely influence what goes on up here. It's going to influence all those chemicals and molecules in the brain that are going to impact our mood, our concentration, our cognitive function. And what we see, which is really interesting, is that the bugs in the small intestine in particular are the key influencers and producers of so many molecules of how our brain functions. So here's a really interesting statistic. 90 to 95% of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut and not in the brain. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter, which means basically a communication molecule that has a lot to do with our mood, our concentration, our focus. And a lot of us will use antidepressants to help support that serotonin level. Well, what we're learning here, what we're seeing here is that we can actually impact on our serotonin levels by working on the digestive and microbiome health in our small intestine. If we look beyond the gut-brain connection, what else are we seeing? This little green guy in the middle is here, your intestines, and we see that bugs produce toxins. This is normal. Okay, we actually have a word for it. It's called endotoxins. Endotoxins basically mean toxins that we endogenously inside of our bodies produce and create. This is a normal happening. We know this. Our body is equipped with a fantastic detoxification mechanism to deal with toxins that we produce. It is normal for us to have bugs. It's normal for us to have toxins. It's normal for us to detoxify. The issue is when we've got unhealthy bugs that create unhealthy and large amounts of toxins that overwhelm our detoxification capacities, and then we just can't keep up. So when that happens and the bugs in the gut are out of balance, they're going to send really wacky messages to the nervous system that can be very inflammatory and impacting, like we said, our mood, our concentration, our memory, our focus, our behavior. To the same token, if we've got a lot of unhappy bugs in our gut that create a lot of toxins, that's going to be a huge load that's being dumped over there onto the liver. And now the liver has to figure out how to deal with it. Well, if the liver is overwhelmed, then there's going to be sort of an overspilling effect, which, as you see in your slide, can have a negative impact on our hormonal system, our endocrine system. So this is where we can even take a further step and see how our stress hormones, Our blood sugar hormones, our thyroid hormones, and our sex or reproductive hormones can also be impacted by what's going on in our gut microbiome. So this is giving us a really good indication of how these bugs in this one spot in our body actually influence any other part of our body. This is a list of what we call evidence-based indications for probiotics. So the research has shown that the probiotics in the HMF product line have these therapeutic effects and indications. When we're looking at them, we see that a lot of these indications are in reflection to things that we talked about. So if it affects our brain health, then it's going to impact cognitive health or leaky brain. That's point number 2. Anxiety, point number 3. How we handle stress, further down the list. Obviously, digestive symptoms, that's where the bugs are going to live. Our immune system, so how often we get colds and flus, the frequency, the intensity, the duration of our symptoms. And then we've got some other things that are really interesting, like athletic performance, like metabolic syndrome in terms of cholesterol, weight, etc. So we're going to peek at some of these along the way. Our second chapter that we're going to talk about is the importance of choosing a probiotic that has research stuff in it. So that's another way of saying, when you're looking at the ingredients listing on your label, on your bottle, you want to make sure that the exact strains of the probiotics that are in there are the ones that have the research behind them. Let's elaborate. Let's look at this concept of a probiotic species versus a strain. A species is the animal type. For example, a dog. A dog is an animal species. However, we've got a lot of different types of dogs, and they're all going to have their own characteristics of how they sound, what they look like, how they can move around, how they can perform, etc. Right? So my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jacqueline Cooper, she's got a great analogy. If you have a sled that you need to get pulled in northern Quebec or northern Canada, are you going to be choosing Chihuahuas or Poodles, or are you going to be choosing Huskies or German Shepherds? You're going to be choosing the strain of the dog that's going to allow you to get the performance that you need. So it's the same sort of analogy. Here we've got the species of the different types of bacteria, like Lactobacillus acidophilus, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus gasseri, or bifidobacters, etc. But they're not all the same. So you can take 2 supplement bottles, they both say Lactobacillus acidophilus, but they're not necessarily interchangeable. What you need to look at is the strain. And that's usually a combination of some letters and numbers that are after the species name. And that's what you want to look for, because that's what the research is behind. So here's an example. We've got a product that's called the HMF Metabolic. It's a great probiotic. We're going to look at it in a few slides on how it can impact weight, cholesterol levels, etc. So if we're like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. Lactobacillus plantarum can actually have a beneficial effect at lowering cholesterol levels. Well, if I've got a cholesterol issue, I'm going to go to a health food store and just pick up a probiotic that says Lactobacillus plantarum. You may not get the effects that you're looking for. You've got to make sure that your probiotic is the one that says CUL66. That's the specific strain that's got the evidence behind its ability to lower cholesterol levels. Similarly, what if we look at a totally different type of probiotic? We've just jumped from cholesterol levels to vaginal and urinary health. They're both using Lactobacillus plantarum. That's what you're seeing in your red box here on the slide. So in both cases, red box is the Lactobacillus plantarum. However, they're very different strains. The cholesterol was evidence-based, right? So we saw the research that we can lower cholesterol levels with the Lactobacillus plantarum of the Col66 specificity. Here, for the vaginal and urinary tract health for women, it's the KABP 061. So that's the type of Lactobacillus plantarum that you're going to want to source if you're having issues with recurrent vaginal yeast infections or UTIs. So this is a really great example of that take-home message that you've got to look at the strains. The amount of research that's behind all of the strains used in the HMF line is absolutely incredible, and that's what we're sharing with you today in our different slides. If we move on to our third chapter for the night, we're looking at 3 very common mistakes that consumers like yourself may be making when you're at the health food store in front of that stand trying to figure out which probiotic to choose, because there's no lack of choice. You go into the health food store, whether it's on the shelf or whether it's on the fridge, you have many companies to choose from who make probiotics. And so what we want to do is point out 3 very common mistakes that people will make that will influence their choice, and it may not be the right way of thinking about it. So if we look at the one mistake that's often made, many individuals say, hey, I'm going to get my bang for my buck, and I'm going to pick a probiotic that's got way more millions and billions than another one. What we've got to remember is that if we go back to that slide of the different sections of the intestine, the yellow bag of the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine, what we see is that the population of probiotics increases as we go down into the gut. So when you're in the large intestine, that's where you need lots and lots of probiotics. But when you're in the small intestine, you need a lot less. The small intestine is where most of the magic is happening, with how your gut is influencing your brain, with how you're going to absorb nutrients, with how you're going to impact your immune system. So you don't necessarily need to have a bazillion, 500 billion, and that can really be a deterrent. So one way of thinking of it is, look, you want to put together a professional hockey team. To do that, are you going to just, go door to door and gather 20 people who say yes to, do you know how to play some hockey? Or are you going to pick 10 pro players? You're going to pick fewer number of better quality so that you can get the result you need. Same goes for probiotics. The second mistake is coming back to this idea of species versus strains. So the second mistake is I'm focusing on the species and not the strain, meaning as long as my probiotic has lots of Lactobacillus plantarum, I'm good for dealing with a vaginal yeast issue. Well, that's not necessarily the case, right? Remember what we saw with the different strains influencing cholesterol versus influencing urogenital health. And so the analogy that we can think of here is like the one I mentioned before. You need to pull a sled. Are you picking Chihuahuas or are you picking Huskies? You need to pick the strain for what performance you're looking to get out of it. Right? A third mistake that's often made is this notion of, I need to get a probiotic that's enteric coated. And I hear this in my practice often. Oh, no, don't worry, I take a probiotic that's enteric coated. Enteric coated has this idea that it coats the probiotic capsule in a way that protects it from the stomach acid. Well, the HMF probiotics have been tried, tested, and true to survive very well through the stomach acid. And you actually want it to take action right away after. So if you have it enteric coated, you might be missing your window of getting your action happening in the small intestine. Like we said, most of the action is happening in the small intestine, with how the gut influences your brain, your immune system, the absorption of your nutrients. So why don't we try to optimize getting that activity in the small intestine? And we can do that by actually not favoring an enteric-coated probiotic, but favoring a probiotic that's got the research behind it showing that it's not killed off by the stomach acid. Okay. If we go into our fourth chapter, we're going to look at life uses. Okay, so these are people like you and me who have different health challenges and who may be looking for a probiotic and want to know, with the plethora of options that exists out there, what would be a good indication for which probiotic would best suit me? So of this group of beautiful women, we're going to take a few examples. Let's start off with Lori. Lori's 33 years old, and she has spent most of her life struggling with constipation. For her, she has 1 to 3 bowel movements per week, and they are difficult to pass. So let's just take a quick moment and do an aside here. Quote unquote, normal bowel movements is having 1 to 3 banana or sausage-like bowel movements a day. If you're having less than that, chances are you're constipated, even if you're not straining, pushing, or pooing out pellets. Maybe you poo out, maybe you poo every 2 to 3 days. It's not that big of a deal. You're not huffing and puffing and straining, and that's what you've been used to, so you consider that to be your normal. Chances are you're constipated. So we want to be having a banana or sausage-like poo 1 to 3 times a day. Okay? Anything under that is usually constipation. So Lori's been dealing with constipation for most of her life. She gets abdominal cramps and bloating, and she probably gets some gas too, which is probably along with all of that fermentation from her constipated bowel movement, and the bugs in her gut are probably not very happy. What we also hear about Lori is that she does tend to have a little bit of anxiety and overwhelm, which is extremely common in our time. We were here all sitting together. So there's about 100 of you. If we were sitting in a nice big room, I would probably ask, show of hands, who here deals with anxiety and overwhelm on a pretty regular basis? If I was a gambling woman, I would assume that most hands would go up. So when we're looking at Lori's situation, what kind of probiotic do we want to consider? We can think about the HMF intensive, also called HMF IBS relief. So this probiotic is 25 billion, and it's got the 4 core strains of the HMF probiotics that have been shown in the evidence to actually reduce symptoms of IBS from anywhere from about 20 to 35%. So after 8 weeks, what we see is that there's a 22% decrease in the number of days of significant abdominal discomfort from having IBS. Constipation can give discomfort, bloating and gas production can give discomfort. So after 8 weeks of just taking that HMF probiotic, we get a decrease in about 22%. With regards to improved bowel habits, this we get an improvement of 32%. That's quite good, right? So that's a third of an improvement. And what we see is that we need to stay on this probiotic longer term to maintain these benefits. What's the other benefit? These exact same strains that are found in the IBS Relief HMF product not only decrease IBS symptoms, but they also bring improvements in cognitive health and mood health. So what we see is that these 4 core strains have been shown in the research, and you can take screenshots of this if you want to get that study, which we include in the bottom right-hand corner. We see that those 4 core strains, after 8 weeks, have a significantly decrease our feelings of overwhelm, nervousness, worry, anxiety, and they increase to a significant amount our ability to focus and to be less distracted. That sounds pretty great. So those same 4 core strains are going to improve Lori's IBS symptoms and very likely her mental health. So that seems like a good option for her. Let's have a look at Zara. Zara's 42, and she gets frequent or recurrent UTIs. Now, with the urinary tract infections that are recurrent or frequent, this is actually really common. And unfortunately, what winds up happening is that women just get into this cycle of constantly taking antibiotics. Of course, if you have a UTI, that is with fever, low back pain, visible blood, you definitely want to be getting antibiotics, right? And when you get to that point of an acute infection, antibiotics can be really, really life-saving, obviously. What we want to do here and what Zara is trying to find out is, can I do anything to try to prevent getting to that place? Because as we know, one of the biggest concerns that's just around the corner that our big international health organizations like the WHO, the NIH, the CDC has been warning about for years is that we're probably not very far from antibiotic resistant infections. So why don't we try to keep our antibiotics for when we really, really, really need to? And when there's recurrent infections, let's see if there's something we can do to help calm the situation and prevent them. And what we're going to see is that actually there is something that we can do. We can consider using the HMF Women's Daily Probiotic. This is a combination of probiotics that are very much indicated for helping to benefit the vaginal canal and to decrease or prevent the risk of recurrent UTIs. We've got that through the 4 core strains. Plus, we've got an extra strain, that's the Lactobacillus gasseri in the Col09 strain, that is indicated for the urogenital tract of females. And we've got the cranberry. So what the cranberry is going to do is that it actually prevents a lot of those bacteria in the urinary tract from sticking to the walls of the urinary tract and staying there and creating a problem. So this can be a really good option for those individuals. And we've got an option that's shelf stable. So most of the probiotic HMF options have a refrigerate model and they have a shelf stable model, meaning you don't need to keep it in the fridge. And the evidence is there to show that it has equal amount of efficacy. The development of having shelf stable probiotics, so ones that you can just leave on your counter, is actually really critical. Because as many of you may experience, keeping supplements in the fridge, like a fish oil or a probiotic, can make it much harder to remember to take. If your bottle is out there next to your coffee maker, next to your phone charger, then chances are you're going to be able to see it and remember to take it. A good place could be to leave it in the bathroom next to your toothbrush. So these are all options. That's not the case for all probiotics, but the HMF line, for the most part, has a shelf-stable equivalent. So this could be a good option for Zara. This is Samantha. I'm going to just take a quick sip here. So Samantha is probably enjoying some perimenopause, menopause, metabolic challenges, where she's noticed that she's put on about 20 pounds over the past 10 years and that she's having a really hard time losing it. She really wants to put attention to this because her doctor told her in her last visit that her cholesterol is creeping up and that's an issue. So now she's really taking it seriously. She wants some help. How can I help with bringing my weight down? How can I help with my cholesterol? Oh yeah, and by the way, what's going on up top here is challenging. I'm moody, I've got brain fog. It's hard for me to concentrate and focus. And oh yeah, I've had IBS for a really long time. Okay, so this is like throwing up all of these different symptoms and then drawing the line to connect them and see this person could probably really benefit from a probiotic. Just as an aside, a little patient story. I saw a patient not long ago and I was really flabbergasted. She came to see me because she wanted to know options. She had recently had a follow-up with her GP who told her at the age of 58 that he's been watching her cholesterol levels slowly creep up over the years, and that by the age of 60, she'll just need to go on a statin, a cholesterol lowering medication, and that's that. And when she said to the doctor, well, if that's not really what I'm looking for, what can I do if I've got 2 years to try to work on this? And the answer was nothing. Well, what we're going to see is that actually there are things that we can do. And one of the ways that we could try to work on that is by using the HMF metabolic. So this is a probiotic that is extremely particular. It's going to hit a number of targets for Samantha. It's going to work on her IBS. It's going to work on her brain chemistry and her mood. And it's also going to work on her metabolic symptoms. Metabolic syndrome is what I call sort of a syndrome of our time. It comes with abdominal weight, so a little too much weight on the belly. And then of all the symptoms, I've got a real difficulty tonight, eh? It's between systems and symptoms. I'm sorry about that. So metabolic syndrome is going to be a whole long list of symptoms that can come in any order, usually due to what's going on with a weight issue in the abdomen. So that's what we call visceral fat. So instead of putting weight on your bum and your hips, you're putting weight on your belly. And that can really drive blood sugar imbalances like insulin resistance, high blood pressure, a fatty liver, elevated cholesterol, sleep apnea, and potentially later on in life with dementia. So this is what we call metabolic syndrome. And it's extremely important for us to really look at it as a totality and try to tackle it. And one of the ways we could tackle it is by looking at the gut microbiome. So there are two different studies. There's the Promogen study phase 1 and the Promogen study phase 2 that have looked at what are the impacts of this HMF metabolic. So this is a fancy slide with all kinds of graphs. And if you're someone who's really into these kinds of details, then take a screenshot of it. Otherwise, if you're not so much into the details, we're going to break it apart. But basically, the dark green bars are representing the statistics of this study for the group that took the HMF metabolic compared to the group that did not, which is in the light green. So what you see in the weight profile graph on the left-hand side is that those who used HMF metabolic had a better improvement in their body weight, a better improvement in their body mass index, and a better improvement in the circumference of their waist. On the right-hand side, in terms of quality of life, compared to those who were in the placebo group, those who did take the HMF metabolic, again in the dark green, had more improvements with overall feeling better, mood, and the quality of their sleep and their energy. So I think that looks pretty good. If we're looking at weight in specific, the Promogen phase 1 study, done only a few years ago, showed that after 6 months of taking just this probiotic with no other changes, they didn't make any dietary changes and they didn't start any kind of new exercise routine. So these adults, after 6 months, the ones who were over 50 and who had higher cholesterol levels, like Samantha, without changing anything in their diet and their exercise, lost 7 pounds, just like that. Because the bugs in the gut are going to largely influence your metabolism and your ability to lose weight or to gain weight. And so this is one way that we can bring in those healthy bugs to try to help our weight and our metabolic processes in our body. That study was really cool. So they went on to study number 2, which was the year after, that said, well, what's going to happen with these people when they take HMF metabolic for 9 months instead of 6 months? Well, with 9 months, we see that they still had the 7-pound weight loss, but now those 3 extra months got them losing some inches. They had a reduction in their waist circumference. They had a reduction in their hip measurement, and it had a beneficial effect on their blood pressure levels. So I think all in all, that's really not bad just by taking one probiotic. And then on top of that, you get all the other benefits. So don't forget that we've got the benefits of Samantha's IBS, where we can ideally improve her symptoms, and on her cognitive health in terms of her brain fog. So we're tying that all together, that this would be a good option for Samantha, and that even though the different HMF products may be labeled for a certain specific indication, like metabolic, like female vaginal health, like immune, they still have those 4 core strains that positively impact digestive function and mental health. So that's the takeaway. And as Hippocrates, all those many years ago, said, all diseases begin in the gut. And we see that more and more as every day goes by, with the piles and piles and piles of research around the importance of the gut microbiome and chronic ailments. So I hope that gave you a bit of an orientation on how to view probiotics, when you're at the store, how you're going to pick your probiotics, and incredible plethora of what probiotics could be useful for. So although we do think probiotics when we're thinking gut, but we can think probiotics for a lot of different things as well. So I am going to open up the chat and the Q&A, and I'm going to do my absolute best to field questions. You need to keep one thing in mind. This is a general platform. I am unable to answer specific questions. So if you ask me a question of, hey, Paula, this is my life story, what probiotics should I be taking? I can't give you specific information because that I can only do for those who are my patients. But I will do my best to give you general recommendations with the hopes that you can find something in there that's pertinent to yourself. All right, so let's go into the Q&A. So Susan, hi Susan, should you be taking probiotics daily? As doesn't that affect? So I'm not really sure what that sentence means, but the question is, should you be taking probiotics daily? I think that's a question of it depends. Some individuals, like what we saw in that Sheffield study, where the HMF IBS relief has an ability to decrease IBS symptoms and improve IBS bowel habits after 8 weeks, but that improvement only maintained while the person kept taking the probiotic. So in that type of a situation, daily is a really good idea. For other individuals who are looking more for preventative health, then I'll say maybe consider taking 1 bottle of a probiotic per season. And that can just help to give your gut microbiome that healthy little boost. But there's no issue with taking a probiotic daily. Okay. What we need to remember about this idea of, well, my microbiome is natural and I want it to be healthy and natural on its own. That's great. And I would like that too. But for that to happen, we have to stop ingesting the massive amounts of toxins that actually injure our gut microbiome day in and day out. So a simple example is glyphosate. So glyphosate is our famous herbicide that is in so many of our foods that has been tried, tested, and true to be a massive gut microbiome disruptor. And we're eating those foods day in and day out, let alone the incredible amounts of stress that we live in and live under. So just those 2 factors alone, let alone the prescription drugs that you may be taking, like the birth control pill, like antacids, like anti-inflammatories, like pain meds. These are all situations that will disrupt your gut microbiome. And so you'll see that most of us are in some kind of a condition of having our gut microbiome disrupted on a daily basis. So Maria, which probiotic do you recommend for someone diagnosed with MS? So again, this isn't about a specific individual, but with regards to MS, then you may want to consider something like the HMF intensive, which has a really good quantity of the probiotics and is going to have a beneficial impact on the small intestine that we want to benefit the immune system, right? So that's the real connection there. Susan Jones, any recommendations for celiac? So again, whether it's the HMF intensive can be an option, the HMF forte can be another option. Those that don't necessarily have a specific indication like immune or like vaginal or women's or metabolic, which are more geared towards a body system, then you can go with more of the general HMF products like HMF Forte or HMF Intensive. We've got an anonymous question here. Hi, anonymous. If you have issues with constipation and cholesterol and weight gain, can you take both of the probiotics that you mentioned in scenarios 1 and 3? Sure, or you can just land on the HMF metabolic because the HMF metabolic is going to have the core strains for the IBS and it's going to have the extra support for the metabolic issue. So you don't need to double down. That's the great part about the HMF is that you get the core strains plus the extra with the other types. So, Tyman, what is the difference between stomach probiotics and oral mouth probiotics? So I'm not so sure I understand your question, but there's a lot of interest and research that talks about the oral microbiome. So microbiome basically just means the ecosystem of bugs that lives in a specific place. So what we've been talking a lot about today are the ecosystems that live in the small and the large intestine. Like we saw, the one in the microbiome, the ecosystems in the stomach is different from each of the three sections of the small intestine, which is different from the large intestine. Therefore, it's going to be different from the mouth, even though it's all the same tube. So when we're looking at the gut microbiome, when we're looking at the oral microbiome and considerations of low-grade infections from a root canal or gingivitis, then we may want to work on helping with the oral microbiome. In that case, what I will use is I will use the HMF Fit for Kids probiotic or Fit for School probiotic. It's a chewable. And so by having a chewable probiotic, then I'm really focusing the attention on benefiting my gut microbiome, my oral microbiome. Again, my apologies. So using a chewable HMF, which is the Fit for School type, you're going to have a positive impact on the oral microbiome. And as an aside, I'll often use a powdered or vitamin C that I'll swish in the mouth for a good 30 to 60 seconds before swallowing. And I'll use a coenzyme Q10 lozenge, chewable, or liquid that we also hold in the mouth for 30 to 60 seconds. In my 20 years of experience, the combination of those three has almost without fault had significant impacts in benefiting the oral health in a 3 to 6 month timeline. So I hope that helps to answer your question. Another anonymous, do you have to change probiotics once in a while? I don't know if you have to, but I generally will do that. So when I've got a patient on a probiotic that they're really into, I'll say, okay, great. That's sort of your main go-to, but now let's dibble and dabble a little bit. So maybe we'll use this type of HMF, and then when you're finished that bottle, you'll rotate between 2 or 3. But on the other hand, I've had patients on the same probiotic formula for many, many years, and they continue to reap the same benefits. So my conclusion there is if you land on a probiotic that you get benefits from, why reinvent the wheel? Okay, and then you can continue fertilizing by including prebiotics in your diet. So that's going to be your fermented foods like your kimchi, your sauerkraut, your kefir, your apple cider vinegar. A question of probiotics for someone with asthma, again, you can just go with those standard HMF Forte or HMF Intensive. Carolina is asking, are probiotics safe in pregnancy and while nursing? That is such a great question, and it makes me a little bit emotional because I had a patient not long ago whose obstetrician told her to immediately stop her probiotics because we don't have any research on the safety with pregnancy. I immediately turned my computer screen around in talking to the patient, and I said, let's go check it out, knowing that there was an incredible amount of research around that. And what we were able to pull up were the research articles showing a benefit of mothers to be taking their probiotics in terms of their own health and baby's health. We're talking about benefits on the cognitive development front, on a digestive front, and on an immune front when we're talking about that eczema, food intolerance kind of picture. And so, yes, using probiotics during pregnancy and nursing is a non-negotiable part of my perinatal package with women. And HMF actually has a really cool one. It's called HMF Maternity. So not only is a probiotic, but it's tailored to the needs of women during breastfeeding and pregnancy. Another anonymous, anything available for kids? Yes, so that's the one I mentioned, the HMF chewable, which is called Fit for School. It comes in a chewable format and it comes in a powdered format. What I really love about that one is that it also includes 1,000 international units of vitamin D like David. So you're actually getting a 2-for-1. And we've seen with a lot of those probiotic strains, actually a decrease in the duration and frequency and intensity of cold and flu symptoms, including a decrease in kids being absent from school. Great. Full-time working parents, this is a plus. We want this. That's usually for kids. I believe the HMF Fit for School is kids as of 4 years old, but I don't have it top of memory. For younger kids, we've got the HMF baby formulas that are baby B like Bob, for kids who are uniquely breastfed, and baby F for kids who are also formula fed. And those can be really important to start getting their gut microbiomes developing in a healthy way right from the get-go. Jane, is there a probiotic good for general everyday use and non-specific? Yes, I would say go with the HMF Forte. General recommendations to help with sleep, I've got a bazillion of those, but with regards to the probiotics, then you can just start off by trying to use a probiotic and see if that's going to impact your sleep. Like we saw in the Promogen slide, where I said, hey, if you're really into these kind of details, take a screenshot. It was the dark green bars of the study group compared to the light green bars of the group that took the placebo. That was with the HMF metabolic. There was a reported improvement in their sleep. Energy, general well-being, and sleep was one of them. So that may be something you want to consider. Otherwise, I definitely invite you to connect with your naturopathic doctor in your area to get lots of support on sleep, because we have so many tools in our toolkit for sleep. Katie, you have a hard time swallowing pills. Would you recommend opening the capsule? Definitely. So you have a hard time swallowing pills? No problem. You can try one of the chewable ones like the HMF Fit for School. It's not just for kids. Okay, so you can use that as well. And if not, what I recommend is, yes, you open the capsule. And what I say is add it to something that's a soft, unheated food, like a yogurt or a non-dairy yogurt alternative, applesauce, or a nut butter. And you don't want to mix it in like this huge bowl. You just take a spoonful and you mix that together and down the hatch in that spoonful. That's actually how I give supplements to my 9-year-old who's not swallowing pills yet. The 14-year-old is now swallowing them, but the 9-year-old still isn't into swallowing pills. So I take out a little like espresso cup. I put a nice tablespoon of applesauce and I open up his probiotic and I add his fish oil and whatever other kind of goodies I feel like giving him of the day. I mix that up and I say, all right, buddy, open up, down the hatch, and it's done. So you don't want it to be heated because we don't want the temperature to change the probiotics or influence them, and you can take it that way. So Katie, you're also saying that you tried eating fermented food, but you know that the probiotics would help. Great, there you go. So Viva, I hope I pronounced that properly. What's the best time to take probiotics, with or without food? I generally say take it with food. Do I have all these studies that prove my rationale? No, but this is my rationale. In nature, how do you normally get probiotics? Through food. So take your probiotic with meals. Okay. So Gemma, that answers that question. Mary, that answers that question. How soon would the metabolic one will take effect with weight loss? So like we said, it was 6 months to get a 7-pound weight loss. So there you go. Okay, and that's taking one a day. So Cinzia, can you choose more than one type to take, or would it be confusing for the body? I think it's more of a question of maybe it's redundant. So the HMF line of all the HMF products, they all have, unless I'm mistaken, the 4 core strains that have all that research behind it for the IBS, the mental health, the cold and flu immune support. So those 4 core strains are impacting those 3 core body systems, your gut, your nervous system, and your immune system. And then when you're picking one specifically, like a cholesterol or like a maternity or vaginal health, that's like the icing on, the cherry on top, the icing on the cake. So, if you're trying to work, you're saying with your cholesterol levels and hormonal stuff, I would go with the HMF metabolic as a place to start. Okay. Excuse me. So I'm seeing a lot. We still got a lot of questions. I'm going to give it until about 8:05, 8:10, and then we will have to wrap up. So Gemma, you're asking which probiotic is good for low stomach acid. You're going to need to address the low stomach acid in another way. So to address the low stomach acid, you can either use bitter foods or bitter herbs. So bitter foods are things like radicchio, endives, apple cider vinegar with water, rapini, dandelion, escarole, chicory. You can probably tell from my name and the foods that I'm listing, I'm Italian. These are what my people know. This is what my lineage knows. This is what my gut knows. And so that's what I often use at the beginning of a meal to get that bitter activity on my tongue, my taste buds, to have a neurological reflex in my stomach to get the parietal cells of the stomach to pump out that acid. Okay. Another really interesting study showed that a very brief 10 to 30-second mindfulness moment before you actually start eating your food can stimulate up to 30% of your stomach acid production. So what I do is I'll sit down, make sure that you've got your feet nice and grounded, okay? And I'll look at my food. Usually I eat in bowls. It's a thing. I love eating in bowls or your plate. I bring it up to my face. I'll look at the beautiful colors. I'll have that moment of gratitude. I'll smell the food, right? Because that's another reflex telling your nervous system and your digestive system that it's time to start eating. And I'll take 3 deep breaths. That's all. Eyes open or closed. 3 nice deep breaths. You've done the gratitude. You've shown your body through your nervous system and your senses that you're about to start eating. So your stomach pumps out some stomach acid. Great. If needed, if those things don't work, then using bitter herbs like gentian, cyanera, which is artichoke, bitter melon, orange peel. These are all different herbs that you can easily find from your health food store that can help produce your stomach acid, right? Or get it triggered to be produced so that you're doing it yourself. The other option is using digestive enzymes that have stomach acid in it. And those are things that you would take with your meals. Otherwise, the probiotic is fine whether you've got high or low stomach acid, so there's no issue there. Okay. Lori, are there herbs or supplements that nurture the good bacteria? In terms of feeding the good bacteria, that's where you're looking at prebiotics. So we listed those fermented foods. In terms of other things like inulin, arabinogalactans, fructooligosaccharides, also known as FOS. These are different fibers and different non-medicinal ingredients that you can find in a lot of probiotics. A lot of the HMF strains actually contain FOS, which is the fructooligosaccharides, and inulin, which are the prebiotics. So again, you're very likely hitting a 2-for-1. How many times a day, Lana, hi, how many times a day should one take the HMF metabolic? These probiotics, by and large, are just 1 a day. Take it with a meal and you're done. Anonymous, some patient diagnosed with colon rectum cancer stage 3, no mets. Which probiotic would you recommend? That is not a general question. That's an extremely case-specific question. And what we need to do is make sure that their white blood cell count is able to tolerate probiotics. So that is something that you do need to see your healthcare provider who's educated in probiotics about. Next question. What would you recommend for women with monthly hormonal acne and to prevent BV? To prevent the BV, I would use 2 things. One, I would use the HMF Women's Health oral probiotic and the Vaginal Health suppositories. So the oral one, I would get them to take 1 a day for at least 3 months. And for the suppositories, if I'm not mistaken, they come in boxes of 7 or 10. So if the BV is pretty predictable, which is often the case, because we're probably having an estrogen dominant surge that is disrupting the gut microbiome, the vaginal microbiome, and bringing out the acne and the BV, okay? Most skin issues, whether it's eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, acne, hives are going to be coming from the gut and disruptions in the gut microbiome. So benefiting your gut microbiome can really help not only with your skin issue, but also with your vaginal flora. And your gut microbiome is going to largely influence how your body metabolizes its estrogen and progesterones, so that you have a chance of bringing down that estrogen dominance. Okay, so I would do that oral HMF Women's a day for at least 3 months. And then let's say that BV, usually for a lot of women, it's like the symptoms start creeping up PMS and then hit when the bleeding starts. Or they have it for like the week before their bleeding starts. And then when the bleed starts, it's like it washes out the infection. So I would start doing nightly vaginal suppositories. So one per night at bedtime for about 3 to 4 nights before you typically get the symptoms, and then continue to finish the box. And I would do that cyclically at the same time for 3 consecutive months and see how that goes. I hope that helps. Anonymous, do probiotics help with joint pain? They can. Okay, so in that triad of how the gut microbiome is going to influence the immune system, disruption in the gut can trigger inflammation that's going to hit the joints. So it is possible, but in my humble opinion and in my experience, it's not going to be enough. You may want to consider an elimination diet if you haven't done that already, where you take out the big culprits. So for some individuals, that's dairy and gluten as a place to start. For others, it's dairy and gluten and the pro-inflammatory foods, which tend to be tomatoes, eggplant, green peppers, and potatoes. What I usually do is I say, okay, 4 weeks, take all of those foods out. All gluten, all dairy, not just lactose-free, but all dairy. Tomatoes, eggplants, green peppers, and potatoes. Take your probiotic, let's say the HMF Forte or HMF Intensive, and do that for 4 weeks, and then reevaluate. If at the end of the 4 weeks, you're like, wow, that's cool, I've got a lot less joint pain, then the next step is a progressive dietary reintroduction. There's no rhyme or reason. You just take one of the foods that you've eliminated and you reintroduce them in your diet one at a time to see if the joint pain is going to get flared up. And that's going to tell you if you've got a food intolerance. Do I recommend HMF Neuro for bloating? I recommend any and all HMFs for bloating. The Neuro is going to give you that extra kick with the glutamine. Does HMF Metabolic contain a dairy product? I'm quite sure that it does not. Okay. And I'm going to go for 1 or 2 more questions. Okay. Let's see. That's okay. I'm going to go over to the chat box. Oh boy. All right. Let's see what we've got here. We've got an incredible amount of comments and questions. I'm going to try to do my best. All right. This is all input on the sound. Okay, so this is, let's see. Lisa, I'm confused because one health practitioner says that too many strains together will not be effective because the immune system will be confused. And to try to fight it, so they recommend just taking one strong strain. I'm not really sure what that healthcare provider means by the immune system is confused. You're taking probiotics. This is the way I see it, okay? You're taking probiotics to benefit your gut garden. The healthier your gut garden, the healthier the messages are going to be that are being sent to their immune system. So if you have healthy bugs, then you're going to get healthy messages to the immune system. If you have unhealthy bugs, then you're going to send unhealthy messages to the immune system. So what your focus is benefiting your garden. And I think using multiple strains that are evidence-based is the way to go with the specific species. That's my 2 cents, okay? So again, ask if you can take 2 probiotics at the same time. I talked about that. Okay, pregnancy, we talked about that. Thank you so much for all the positive feedback. That's awesome. It's not easy to give a lecture to a screen. So it's really great to get that positive feedback. So thank you very much. Linda Pro, do you take probiotics yourself? I'm not here to talk about myself as a patient, but I did talk about my son and my family members. And also what do I think about taking BioK periodically to balance bowels? If it works for you, go for it. But I'm really into the HMF because of all the research behind it. So that's what I'm here. And then with regards to prebiotics, I talked about that, Linda. So that should be answered. What about doing a fast for a few weeks? Is it beneficial to take probiotics after fasting? Yes or no? I would assume so. And I think that is a wrap. So we're going to close that. It is 8:12. I want to thank everyone for their participation. Thank you for staying all of this time. I really hope you get to take at least a few nuggets of good information from this. And I really look forward to seeing you next time for another one of our webinars. I wish you all the very best, a lot of health, a little happiness, a lot of safety, and a lot of great times this summer, and a lot of good health. Take care.